Good evening. That did not sound really exciting. Good evening. That sounds much better. On behalf of Phillips Theological Seminary, I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's gathering. Whether you're joining us in person or virtually, I am Douglas Poe, the president of Phillips. This annual event invites us to remember the Tulsa Race Massacre while also exploring the broader intersection between race, religion, and justice. We are not only reminding individuals of what happened, but are challenging all of us to think about how do we create a new future together. Since 1906, Phillips Theological Seminary has been committed to creating leaders for social and spiritual impact in the world. We're located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We offer flexible degree programs like the Master of Divinity and a Doctor of Ministry that allow 2/3 of your coursework to be completed online. Our students come from across the country and all around the world, enriching our community with diverse perspectives. We also are home to the Center for Ministry and Lay Training, which provides a certificate in pastoral ministry, continuing education for clergy, and leadership training for lay persons. We are proudly affiliated with the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and Phillips is also ecumenical, welcoming students from many denominations and backgrounds who are called to lead with integrity, courage, and compassion. We are grateful to share this space tonight with a remarkable community of leaders and scholars who will help us wrestle with the legacies of violence, resistance, and resilience. And we are especially honored to host Dr. Melynda Price, who will deliver this year's lecture. Thank you for joining us in this sacred work of reflection and truth-telling, and we will begin this evening with music.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Was grace that taught my heart to beat, and grace my feet relieved. How precious deep that grace appeared. The hour I first believed. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We've no less day to see God's grace than when we first begun. Praise God, 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 God, praise God, praise God, praise God. Amazing grace. That's why we all here, because of the grace of God. And I just want to say, give Mark Furness a big hand on that guitar solo. The reason I say that, this man a month ago had a very serious heart attack. And he said, hey, I'll be ready in a month. Praise God. Yeah, can we do a little Billie Holiday? Maybe, why not? Them that's God shall get, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is new. Mama may have, and Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Yes, the rich get more, while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grade. Mama may have, and Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. When you got money, you got lots of friends crowding round your door. But wait a minute, when the money's gone and all your spending is, they won't be crowding round anymore. No, no, no. Rich relations will give you a crust of bread and such. You can help yourself, but don't take too much, 'cause Mama may have, and Papa may have. God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. you got money, you got lots of friends crowding round your door. Oh, but when the money's gone and all you're spending is, they won't be crowding round anymore. No, no, no. Rich relations give you a crust of bread and such. You can help yourself, but don't take too much, 'cause Mama may have and Papa may have. God bless the child that's got his own. That's got his own. His own, yeah. Oh man, I'm starting to think about the good old days. But I want to mention that I came here in the '60s, and my mama worked down there on Greenwood, and let me tell you, they could not stop that Greenwood spirit. It was jumping. The sidewalks were just packed with people, and it was really happening. Then all of a sudden, urban renewal, and yeah, something about the white folks had colder ice out south, and next thing you know, well, God bless the child. But like I was saying, you know, Sunday morning was real important, but let me tell you, this Saturday night was happening too. Yeah. So this next one is, you might know it, it's Porgy and Bess, I think it was, Summertime. Let's do it with a little bossa nova. How's that? Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping, said the cotton is high. Your dad is rich and your mama's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. I said one of these mornings you're gonna wake up singing. You spread your wings, you'll take to the sky. Oh, your daddy's little girl. I said nothing can harm you with daddy and mama standing by. Mr. Aaron Henderson, come on. The living is easy. Fish are jumping, said the cotton is high. Oh, your dad is rich, said nothing can harm with mama and daddy standing by. Come on. said jumping in the cartoon's high. Oh, your dad is rich and your mama's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Yeah, summertime. Woo! Yeah. Wow. Mr. Aaron Henderson over there. Okay. Might as well introduce everybody on bass, Doug McDuffie. And then, and by the way, I have to say, Mark and this next gentleman on drums, they're both in the Oklahoma Music Hall of Fame. And let me just say it for Edward Spike Gore on drums, yeah.
Thank you very much.
There he is, Spike. Give
Thank
it
you
up,
very
give it up.
much.
Yeah, we got time for one more. Can we do one more just real quick? Like, I'm sorry, I know it's been a long time. Yeah. But this next song by Marvin Gaye, y'all know it, but it's just amazing how history kind of repeats itself. And I'm just wondering, you know, hey, I don't know about y'all, but I'm awake. I'm telling you, eyes wide open. What's going on? What's going on? Mother, mother, there's far too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. You see, war is not the answer, but only love can conquer hate. No, you got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Picket line and picket sign. Don't punish me with brutality. I said, talk to me so you can see what's going on. What's going on? You tell me what's going on. What's going on? Woo! Everybody thinks we're wrong, but who are they to judge us? Simply 'cause our hair is gone. You know we've got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Picket line and picket sign. Don't punish me with brutality. I said, talk to me. You can see what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? You tell me what's going on. What's going on? 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 Thank y'all. Daryl Crispin ingredients. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wow.
Is just amazing. I'll give them a moment to settle before we move forward. So once again, thank you to Pastor Daryl Christopher and the Ingredients for this inspiring performance. You got us all moving a little bit there. Thank you. I'm Dr. Lisa Davison. I'm the Johnny Ergel Cadjo Professor of Hebrew Bible and the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean here at Phillips Theological Seminary. It is my honor to invite two powerful advocates, representatives of partners that we work with in the seeking of justice and truth-telling, so that they can offer reflections on the importance of continued dialogue and action around the Tulsa race massacre. In a moment, I will ask you to please welcome Dr. Raymond Doswell, Executive Director of the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center, and Reverend Bill White, Director of Cultural Engagement and Economic Development for the Terrence Crutcher Foundation. So, Dr. Doswell, Reverend White, we invite you to the microphone.
And good evening. We're so pleased to be here with you. I'm Raymond Doswell. I'm the Executive Director at Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center at the historic corner of Archer and Greenwood near downtown Tulsa. We're happy to welcome you all to come and visit us and learn about the history of Greenwood, the neighborhood, what has become affectionately known also as Black Wall Street, of course, the Tulsa Race Massacre, and the resilience of the community that survived that and grew to become a vibrant space again. So I'm very grateful, thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to be here, the assembled faculty and clergy. We're very excited to be here with you, all the guests. Please, next time, don't let me have to follow the band. I'm grateful for the band and their excellent walk through the diaspora of our music and the great intersection of the sacred and the secular tonight with that. I come very grateful, and I'm also reflective and grateful for our guest speaker, very anxious and curious to hear your words and looking for great enlightenment from your experience here, and very happy that you're able to come out and be with us. I'm grateful for our friends also who are watching online, and if you get a chance to come, please come and see the art exhibition that we have had the great pleasure of enjoying this evening. Grateful for the artists and them sharing their wonderful talents and their vision of Black culture especially. I'm reflecting also on the title of the exhibition that has been used as it reflects also the music, When I Lay My Burden Down, which was a great spiritual song and one that allowed me to reflect back on my mother, who was for some reason that talent didn't come to me, but she was a fantastic gospel singer. And that was one of the songs she sang. And you know the words, glory, glory, hallelujah, since I laid my burdens down. Hallelujah, exaltation, going back to the Torah, but also embraced by Christianity, an exaltation of gratefulness and praise. So I'm feeling grateful, and more importantly, grateful for you all for being here, wanting to open yourself up to further enlightenment, and grateful to Phillips Seminary for giving us this opportunity for fellowship and enlightenment as well. So please open your hearts and minds to what you're going to hear tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I want to make sure I didn't forget to have my talking points already lined up, because sometimes, you start rambling and no one remembers anything that you said, so I want to make sure that you guys remember everything I'm saying. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the president. Thank you for having us out, all the faculty and all the guests. Thank you so much for coming out and hearing and learning more about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I think it's one of the stories that the world needs to learn more about, just because as the singer mentioned, the pastor mentioned, history has a strange way of repeating itself. But the question is, do human beings, do we learn from history? Or are we going to be back repeating over in this cycle, is almost like wash and repeat once again? So I also like to say, I'd like to send my regrets, Dr. Crutcher, both Dr. Crutchers. One, Dr. Joey Crutcher, is actually a graduate of the seminary here. He could not be here. He was feeling a little bit under the weather. And Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, she could not be here. She was also under the weather, so they sent me instead to bless all of y'all. And I'm so appreciative of that as well. And they want to let you know that they really do value the relationship of the seminary here that they have with the Terrence Crutcher Foundation and with Phillips as well. One of the things that I want to mention is the mission of the Terrence Crutcher Foundation is to create just and liberated communities free from violence and harm. And exactly what does that really mean? It means something as simple as we like to have street lights in our communities. We like to have sidewalks in our community. And one of the things I find so fascinating is I was talking to an officer a while ago, and they were giving me this a story about what happened in Philadelphia. They used to have this corner in Philadelphia. It was one of the worst drug corners in Philadelphia. And what they did in order to change that, they said, you know what, real simply, we're going to put more lights there, and we're going to put artwork on the corner. And when they did that, what happened to the crime in that area? It just went away. And they said, you know, if we did that more in this city, what can we do with this crime? And so if you go to Philadelphia now, you would see murals all over the place. And the reason why they did that is because it helped reduce crime in the area and made people feel heard, made people feel seen, and made people feel like they're actually being invested in as well. And so with the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, you know, we've been doing a lot of advocacy work and strengthening communities and honoring the legacy of our ancestors. For the last 8 years, I believe, maybe a little longer than that, we've been fighting change the systems, and the foundation is moving more now towards a phase of impact. And what does that mean is, you know, we've been really pushing for police accountability, and the police have been fighting that from day one. We find that very interesting that they don't want to make that change. But, you know, with that, we have found that not only are we trying to help promote different policy changes and pushing the police and pushing the city to be better, but we also are looking at the whole aspect of economic development, of really what does that do for a community. If communities have good, strong economic development, that really changes a city, changes an area. And as we're moving to our next phase of impact, we have recently purchased, well, not recently, maybe a couple years ago, 2 years ago now, we purchased North Point. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with North Point. It's on the corner of Pine and MLK. Well, we're happy to report that that building we're done with phase one of that, in which we have completely gutted out the entire middle of the building. So we have two tenants now, two anchor tenants, a Bank of America on the east side, or on the south side, and State Farm on the east side. And one of the things that we are endeavoring to do with this facility is make it an economic generator for the area. And what that's really going to do for it is so people have a way for employment, a way to have a tax base in the city, a way for people to aspire something different. Because I don't know if you noticed or not, when you're in North Tulsa, as soon as you cross Pine, it's almost like you go to a whole nother city. It just kind of falls off. But with that, we are taking the aspect of, yes, it may fall off, but we're going to reinvest in this area to make it better, to make it brighter, to make it stronger, and stir that economic stick so thereby we can reinvent Black Wall Street once again. And that's really what we're after, is not going backward in time saying, boy, wasn't it great back in 1921? But we want to say how much better it is in 2026 as we move forward with all of your help to make Greenwood a better place. So if you have your phone, you want to get on your phone and you can donate to the Greenwood North. We have a QR code on our website. We would love for everyone to donate, whether it be $1 to $1 million. We don't discriminate with your money. We will take millions, and that's spelled M-I-L-L-I-O-N. Just in case you want to write a check, I'll be in the back, so you can drop me off a check. I'll be more than happy to take it from you as well. But really, we love for your support of what we're doing as we move along to our next phase of impact. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Professor Arthur Carter, Assistant Professor of New Testament and Director of Black Church Traditions and African American Faith Life here at Phillips Theological Seminary. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote lecturer, Dr. Melynda Price. Dr. Price is the Director of the Institute for Research on Women and Gender and Professor of Women and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan. She also co-leads the Monument Workshop, a Mellon-funded interdisciplinary research and legal advocacy project focused on monuments and memorial landscapes in collaboration with Zachary Berry at the University of Kentucky. Previously, Dr. Price served as the inaugural J. David Rosenberg Professor of Law and John and Joan Gaines Professor of Humanities at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, where she also directed the Gaines Center for the Humanities. From 2012 to 2017, Dr. Price led the African American and Africana Studies program at the University of Kentucky. Her esteemed career has included fellowships at Princeton University and a research residency at the London School of Economics. Dr. Price's research centers on law, race, gender, citizenship, and politics of punishment. Her work spans both scholarly and public-facing platforms. She is the author of At the Cross, Race, Religion, and Citizenship in the Politics of the Death Penalty, published by Oxford University Press, which this work is an astute exploration and analysis of African-American perceptions of the death penalty, religious symbolism, and the inherent power involved in death. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan, a JD from the University of Texas School of Law, and an undergraduate degree in physics. It's a good degree. From Prairie View A&M University. I also majored in physics. Little biased. Please join me in welcoming tonight's keynote lecturer, Dr. Melynda Price.
Thank you so much. I have to say, when you are a secular trained academic invited to speak to church people, you're always a little nervous, but I want to thank Pastor Darrell for setting the tone that we can have a little fun up in here. And so I have prepared some words, and I'm going to go through them in the time that I'm allotted, and I'm happy to answer your questions as we go. So I'm honored tonight to be in Tulsa, not only because of this occasion, but my son's godfather, my best friend, is a Tulsa native. So I just like to name Kevin Millard and his mother, who lived here, passed away during the pandemic, Charmaine Millard. I always think about them, how I never actually got to meet her here, but only outside of Oklahoma. I'm also excited because I have been telling people over again how Kaneem, one of the artists, along with Romeo Robinson, but Kaneem and I, we went to middle school together, which is the worst possible period in a life two people could spend together. It's as close as I'll ever get to understanding what my uncles experienced in Vietnam, I think. But we went to the same church as children. We were in confirmation class together, and we had no idea that this was happening. It's just a flyer showed up on Facebook, and my mother was like, "That's Kaneem," and I was like, "Yes, it is." So it's always good when there is something that moves in a way to say that what you are doing is you're in the right place at the right time. I want to thank Dean Davison, Vice President Dean Davison, and the folks here at Phillips for asking me to do this. I watched this video that Dr. Carter did, and I'm almost like I almost turned around and went back home because I was like, I don't know if I can fulfill this great thing, but it's always nice to hear that somebody read a book you wrote, even if it's not just your mama, which is what I was saying. So I also want to thank my son, my 15-year-old son, James, who's here with me today. And his accommodating spirit has allowed me to know both the joy and the complexities of motherhood while also being a productive scholar because of how well he travels with me. So I want to thank him as well. So I have several thick sheets of paper, but I'm going to say to you now that it has very large font because I keep taking my glasses on and off, which I really need, and I want to make sure I can still see it. And I'm going to say at the beginning that I am trained as a lawyer and a social scientist, but my first training began at home with my mother, who believed in the transformative and progressive power of religion, which is my fancy way of saying we went to church a lot in my house. But I'm not a theologian. I spent a lot of time with theologians. I explained to President Poe earlier today, but I'm not a theologian. Although I'm going to try to get with y'all a little bit somewhere towards the end. And I say all this at the beginning to say it would betray both my upbringing and how I understand my position in the world if my comments did not include some of the ways that faith is intertwined in my work. So my mother was also a very gifted speaker and Sunday school teacher who used to travel the circuit to mission workshops on Saturday. So she always had a theme, so I always have a theme. And so my theme for today is raising new monuments, the importance of memory and a flexible history in a forward-moving society. So they have also given me technology, by the way, which I found it, it's in my pocket. So I joke, it's not my joke, I actually think I got it from Pastor Renita Weems, who says that she's a Flintstone pretending to be a Jetson. And I also add that my child is a Jetson I'm trying to raise like a Flintstone, but it's not working. Let's see if this works. There it goes. Okay. So I won't repeat the atrocities of the Tulsa Massacre. This community will surely, and folks in this room have labored to ensure that this injustice and violence against Tulsa's Black community has not been forgotten. The work of this community continues really to set a national model for how communities can go about doing this in a way that's very forward-thinking and productive. We had the opportunity to visit Greenwood Rising and to have Dr. Goswald give us a tour. And it was so very fulfilling. And really, I was invited here to give you, some words, and I want to say that I leave here with as much encouragement and affirmation that what I'm doing is on the right path. So I'm going to talk a lot about me. So there you go. Okay, for the first decade of my career, my scholarship focused on the death penalty in the U.S., specifically on the death penalty in Texas. I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan, as was mentioned, which President Poe also calls a better school than Ohio State. A better school than yeah, I had to work that in today. So in my first semester of graduate school, I took a course on Latin American politics, which I thought would be the area that I studied from a professor who turned out to be the leading scholar of Catholicism in Latin America. And what I thought would be a career studying really scientific innovation on economic development in Latin America as countries in the 1990s were sort of turning away from authoritarianism. We live in a very different world now. The world is really upside down compared to that time, would take a different path. The professor really focused on the impact of religion, particularly liberation theology, on the substantial change in politics we were seeing at that time. This is a photo of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, women who used their social and religious status as mothers to protest against authoritarianism during the Dirty War in Argentina and demand accountability for their children and various people who were disappeared by the governments, which had a tremendous impact on me, and you'll see as I talk about the work that I do going forward. My own political, I don't know why I keep looking, there's a screen right here behind me, but I just want to make sure that y'all are seeing what I'm saying, okay? My own political socialization is very much grounded in the Black church. This important first institution of Black America is where my political education and training began. One of my first memories of a collective democratic process exercise was actually attending a church business meeting as a child with my mother. I know y'all are laughing for the right reasons. So, and sometimes I think about it as maybe organized chaos, but there was voting, so it's still democracy. And I can remember the demands to be attentive to the bylaws and the Constitution, the factions, the yelling, the velvet tapestry of Martin Luther King and John and Jack Kennedy, the wood paneling in the church halls. So this is what young people would say, tell people your age by not telling them your age. I still remember that, so my understanding of religion because of my growing up in the Black church is deeply connected to politics. So my deep immersion in Latin American politics brought me back to my first encounters also with the work of James Cone in college and his articulation of liberation theology. And it helped me to think about the ways in which I had experienced religion, right, as an avenue for liberation within the Black community as one of the strategies in this new place. But then home called. As I was taking my final qualifying exams for the PhD, the state of Texas set an execution date for Carla Faye Tucker, who's the woman pictured here. And Carla Faye Tucker was a young woman with an angel's face who killed 2 people with a pickaxe. She murdered 2 people in 1983, and then while she was on death row, she was born again. And there was a big debate about whether or not she should be executed, and conservative religious leaders who normally have been supportive of the death penalty as a form of punishment came forward to ask for forgiveness for Carla Faye Tucker. And George W. Bush, who was then the governor of the state of Texas, he came on the steps of the state capitol and said, I too am born again. But I believe in the rule of law. Therefore, Carla Faye Tucker should be executed. And right there in my apartment in Ann Arbor, I changed course, I applied to law school, and it changed the future of where I was going, because how could I go to Latin America to focus on what those people were doing when I did not really have a full understanding of what was happening in the place where my family had lived for five generations. So I went to law school. I spent 2 of my 3 years working in the capital punishment clinic with people on death row. I visited death row. And these experiences really lay the foundation for my first book. And even though I have one I like to say first, because I come from a name it and claim it kind of people, so I'm hopeful that one day there will be more, but my first book, this is actually the right crowd. Y'all pray for me and my work. So academics get testy when you say stuff like that. But shortly after my last visit to death row, I found out that I was pregnant with my son. And I actually had made a slide with his baby picture, but since he's here, I thought, I don't need that smoke all the way home. So I just deleted that slide. But I made a decision that while I was carrying him, I would not enter another lockup facility. There were too many Black men who were going to prison, and I was not going to take my child of unknown gender at the time into one of those facilities, which turned out to be actually a long-term distancing from a work engaged directly in prisons. Although I could tell you a story about how I once went visit a prison at night in Kentucky that looked like the prison from Shawshank, and gave a Black History Month speech while a guard who looked like Doogie Howser claimed he could protect me from 300 inmates. But that's a different story. And he was like, ma'am, just raise your hand if you feel uncomfortable. And I was like, for what, sir, are you going to do to these people? Okay. So my work on the death penalty lessened over the years, but there were still parts of that project that lingered with me and really continue to drive the work that I do today, after having spent so much time trying to make sense of and resist what I consider to be a continuing injustice and moral failing of this country. So the first question that still sticks with me is how the death penalty shapes the African Americans' view, I would say, a sort of the tolerance of a limited equality in the post-1960s civil rights. I'll explain what I mean by that. So Tulsa, part of what happens in Tulsa in 1921 is part of a sort of years of terror and violence enacted against Black people. And many people don't realize that the death penalty actually becomes codified in the South in the wake of some of this action, because you didn't really need the death penalty because mob violence took care of a lot of what was happening. So it was really an effort to rein in control of some of the violence that was happening under the auspices of the state that would include some, even a very limited process. And Ida B. Wells, a journalist and activist, said at the time that our country's national crime is lynching. It is not the creature of an hour, the sudden outburst of uncontrolled fury, or the unspeakable brutality of an insane mob. It represents cool, calculating deliberation of intelligent people who openly avow that there is an unwritten law that justifies them putting human beings to death without a trial, without a jury. She said that in 1900. And my work focused on Texas, not just because it was home, but also because it continues to be the most significant site for legal and political maintenance of the death penalty in the US. So for instance, most of my research focuses on really the city of Houston, which is where I grew up. And if you were to take Harris County, which is one of the counties covered by the city of Houston, out of the state of Texas, it would be third in terms of number of people who have been executed from that jurisdiction and who are on death row behind, number one, the rest of Texas, and number two, Virginia. Right, so it's a substantial place where the death penalty is meaningful. As a matter of fact, I tried to find it for these slides, but I couldn't find it. If you take a map, a county-level map of the state of Texas from the 1920s and look at the states where there's the highest concentrations of lynchings, you can almost put right on top of it the same map where there's the highest concentration of capital convictions, people who are executed almost one-to-one. But historians will tell you that correlation is not causation, but it is correlation. Okay. So my work focused on Texas, and as part of the research for that book, I conducted a series of focus groups, and it was clear from the response of the participants that capital punishment in the places where it's an active part of punishment remains a clear part of the regime. And if there could not be the same treatment, right, as Black people could not have the same treatment as whites, they would settle for a lower treatment of everybody, as long as everybody was treated the same, right? And that's not exactly what we wanted to find coming into in the 2000s. And so one of the participants, who was 19 at the time, a young woman named Denise, said at first they hung them, now they stick them with the needle. There was a clear historical thread between what she saw of the death penalty of the 1920s and what she experienced in the 2000s. And this data was gathered before the killing of Trayvon Martin, or before Breonna Taylor, before George Floyd, or the numerous police interactions that sparked the movement for Black Lives, the largely failed prosecutions. We saw how the elusive nature of justice continues to be a part of how Black people measure equality. So the second question that lingered, became more urgent after the death of Trayvon Martin, was really a question about Black victims of crime. I was frequently invited to talk about the death penalty, and there would be representatives from crime victims groups, fair and balanced. So the crime victims groups who would be holding, mostly white people, holding pictures of their murdered white children. And I thought to myself, if most violence is interracial, which is still true, where are the people who are grieving the Black people who have been murdered by other Black people? And that has led me to what will be my second book soon enough, if your prayers work. I'm just joking. So this be my next book, which is about a woman named Clementine Barfield, who is pictured here, who in the summer of 1986, 3 of her sons were in a car and stopped for gas in Detroit. And a kid who they had an altercation with, shot into the car. One of her sons, who was 16, was killed. Her son, who was 17-year-old, suffered impairments the day he died, which was not about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And she begins what really is the beginning of what some people call the urban peace and justice movement, where she starts a group called Save Our Sons and Daughters, which starts with 7 grieving mothers and becomes a very large and significant group in Detroit, and does amazing and wonderful things around peace and reconciliation, particularly around the violence associated with children, which also I first began to think about because I had encountered the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, even though she predates them. So the third question, I could tell you, I talk about that forever. I don't know why I didn't talk about it, but anyway, I'll talk about something else. So the third question that I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight is about a project. I thought I was working on a project about the death penalty, but I realized that really it was bigger than that, in part because it is easy to live in the South and not appreciate the way that the very soil itself holds memories of racial subjugation. Let me say it one more time. It's very easy. It's beautiful. It's green. Some places people have hills. We don't have those in Houston. Some people have trees. We have very few of those as well. But it's very easy to live in the South and not appreciate the way the very soil itself holds memories of racial subjugation. So in a focus group, one of those focus groups I did for that book, with a group of Black women at a senior center, I'm just going to stop and say, for those of you who do qualitative research, it is very hard, even as the gray on my hair comes in, to do focus groups with old people. Because they would say, one of them, I said, what do you think about the death penalty? One of them would say, oh, it's terrible. And the rest of them would say, mm-hmm. And then I would say, but what do you think? And she was like, she said it. She said it already. And I was like, no, I need all y'all to say something. So anyway, it was a wonderful day that I spent with these women. It's the longest focus group with the shortest transcription. But one of the things that was very interesting was that they had, all these women knew each other because they had come from a very small town outside of Houston. And the thing that they really wanted to talk about was the lynching tree that was still in front of the courtroom. In the courthouse in their hometown. I knew this, I wrote this, by the way, before I came here, and Ty, our wonderful tour guide, showed us where the lynching tree has been taken down here in Tulsa. But in many places, Sherilyn Eiffel, who was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a law professor at the University of Maryland, wrote this very good book called On the Courthouse Lawn, about the ways in which courthouses themselves are monuments to lynching. I'm just going to point out this photograph, which is by a historian named Ken Gonzalez-Day, who wrote a very important history about about lynching in the West, and the ways in which there's a really important history of Black people being lynched, but many different people were lynched in this country. And he writes about the lynching of mostly indigenous and Mexican American people in places like California and Arizona. And he is also an artist himself, and he takes old lynching photographs and removes the bodies, which forces you to look at the tree and the people. So you might look at his work. And so the tree, so the lynching tree and the lingering aspect to Black people on justice, those kinds of items, along with the project that I had that I had seen in the some work done on in Kentucky and Louisville, those kinds of things actually make Black people less likely to go to courthouses, right? Their experience as they interact with the courthouse actually starts from the moment they get out of their car. And so they were able to track in Louisville the way that people, because of their negative associations with courthouses themselves, didn't come and do things like fight traffic tickets. They wanted no parts of the courthouse at all. And so this question that I had about the landscape and its connection to criminal justice, and my former colleague Zach Bray, who is still my co-principal investigator, at the monuments workshop, we began talking about our various interests in monuments. Now, Zach is a self-described dirt lawyer. So I don't know if you have any lawyers here in town, but anything that's connected to dirt, property, real estate, zoning, he does all that stuff, but he also does monuments. And we began talking to each other about monuments and what they mean, and we organized this symposium, and we brought together legal scholars, politicians, historians to talk about what role could the law play in working to transform the monument landscape. Now, this was before the Mellon Foundation. I think now they're up to $300 million that they're investing in changing America's monument landscape. So 5 years later, we are the co-directors of the Monuments Workshop at the University of Kentucky. I accepted a job at the University of Michigan, and then I think 4 weeks later, while I'm like, goodbye, we got this money from the Mellon Foundation. And so now I'm like, hello. I'm down there all the time. And we have this, so we tried to integrate legal advice into efforts to improve monuments and the monuments landscape. And we want to help folks who are engaged in the righteous work of trying to construct new stories, new monuments, new memorials, and to have a more complete and complex history to give them the kinds of legal and expert advice that they need. So we started in Kentucky, but we now are working with groups in Texas, in Tennessee, in North Carolina. We made a pitch to the folks at Mellon that lawyers were actually needed earlier in the process. And I know some of you are like, no, they were not. But it is true, in fact. I have a former colleague who used to say, nobody wakes up on a day and they say, you know what, I'm feeling real good today. You know what I should do? Go see a lawyer. Like, no one does that. But it is true, I'm telling you, that from earlier stages, if you have lawyers involved, it actually can make processes go more smoothly. So we define monuments as any specific object, place, or landmark, whether built or natural, which is set aside from ordinary use for special attention or regard, and which comes to fix a set of values and messages in a physical place, right? So we do things like help people get historical markers. We just helped the Owensville, Kentucky get a marker for the Kentucky Spring Saddle, which no one seems to have ever seen in person, but that marker says that it's one out there in the world. We help to ensure the conservation of natural monuments, like paths, stones that people go to visit that are particularly in rural areas. And we mostly go about this by sort of becoming experts in the legal authority around these policies and deep legal research on what is needed in specific locations. Our largest portfolio of projects for the Monument Workshop has become the preservation of Black cemeteries and related memorial spaces. So I was going to say on the left, so it's on your right. This is a mirrored image. Okay, with the small crosses is a cemetery that was discovered. There's a biological research station at Campbellsville University in Campbellsville, Kentucky. The biologists were out looking around, and one of them realized she was standing in a field of crosses and stepped out and never walks back over there again. And now we're helping to fund the archaeological research to determine exactly where people are buried, as well as what kinds of legal relationships need to be created with the universities and descendants, and how we understand preservation. On the other side is a cemetery in Marshall, Texas, where we were called in by archaeologists, where these people are being obstructed from visiting the old Canaan cemetery by a family who claims in the 1920s that Black community made a land swap with them, and they have a new cemetery. This is a picture of a drone in another cemetery project that we are working with. And so we bring to bear the sort of great weight of expertise along with legal representation. And in fact, we have just become the sort of council of record to protect a cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky, which is called the Greenwood Cemetery, Mr. Goswell, which is particularly vulnerable because of this plans around gentrification and economic development, and we think that our intervention may actually be able to allow those descendants to protect the sacred space of where their people are buried, right? So this is a long, winding road of what the things that I have done to get us to the question of the urgency of remembrance and to make sure that history is flexible enough to continue expanding to include more stories. It is easy in the aggressive attacks on history and academic research to relegate those things that can be viewed as symbolic, like monuments, to low on the priority list when we think about the millions and millions of dollars lost for cancer research, for the training of medical professionals. But I think it's important. I think we can hold more than one thought at a time. I lost my place. Okay, here we go. So when preparing for this visit, I just kept thinking about, here's this little Bible I'm gonna throw in right here. So I called my mother again this morning just to ask her what she thought about what I was about to say. Because nobody's better than her. Well, my Aunt Mary might be okay. And the thing that I kept thinking about when Dr. Davidson asked me, even before I had narrowed down why it popped in my head, was about the Tower of Babel. Now, this is about funny. I'm like, some of you may know the story of the Tower of Babel, but I suspect all y'all know about the Tower of Babel in Genesis, where the whole world had one. They all said they could all talk to each other, which just thinking about it is really a bad idea, by the way. So they could all talk to each other, and they found themselves in an open plain and decided that they could now make bricks and mortar, and they were like, you know what we're going to do? Because they had some time on their hands. Which reminds me, the first time I went to death row, my mother said, she only said one thing. She said, men in prison have a lot of time on their hands, and you are not something for them to do. Okay, so they were there, and they had a lot of time on their hands, and they got together, and they said, you know what we should do? We should build something here, right? They said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. I want you to remember that they want to make a name for themselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered across the earth. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand each other. So a very clear and common interpretation is that this tower represents human ambition, right, to reach a divine status, which goes against the plan of God. And I thought of it because it's a story where the people erect a structure in ways that are aspirational and ambitious. And I am not a person, because I grew up in capitalist America, right, where ambition is a problem, right? And the scripture says they want to make a name for themselves, which is also in our Instagrammable America, not a thing that I have in principle grand objections to, right? Making a historical mark requires ambition, and it's a natural human impulse. But I think I thought of these particular texts because of its focus on the perils of a singular vision, right? A singular vision or marker for the human story, right? They wanted to build one tower, not many towers. A singular history leaves a lot of people out. And part of the problem with monuments and memorials in this country is that it doesn't include enough people. So if you look at the top 50 people who have monuments in their honor, only 5 are people of color. I would quiz y'all, but I'm on a time schedule. You might guess. I know I'll be like, Martin Luther King. Yes, he's actually the most memorialized is Abraham Lincoln, with about 200 monuments, and then George Washington's close second. And then Martin Luther King, of people of color, has the highest at 86. okay? None of the top 50 memorials include Latinos, Asian Pacific Islanders, or self-identified LGBTQ figures. There are 22 monuments, just to give you some perspective, 22 monuments in the United States that depict mermaids. Don't ask me where and why. It's just what the Monuments Lab did a survey, and this is what they found. 22 that depict mermaids, but only 2 of U.S. Congresswomen. That 22 is one more than Harriet Tubman, who's the second person of color on that top 50 list. That is 2 more than Tecumseh and Sacagawea, and 3 more than Frederick Douglass, okay? The majority of monuments, American memorials, really focus on violent events, with fully a third of them that commemorate war. For example, while nearly 6,000 monuments reference the Civil War, only 9 mention Reconstruction that followed, okay? So when we think about the Tower of Babel, God confuses the people with the creation of multiple languages, which could just as easily be read as a warning against pride and the respecting God's authority, but also about the need for diversity. How many people in here, raise your hand if you have tried to learn I guess all y'all had to learn the Hebrew Bible. I don't even know why I'm asking y'all this. Again, the crowd, sorry. This was other academics, this would not be as easy. But I have been trying to become fluent in Spanish probably since like the 6th grade. It has not happened, but I still take my lessons either way. But even when you speak the same language, talking across perspective is very hard. I think it could also be a lesson for how we understand the need to develop a more accurate historical narrative and monument landscape, because the stories we tell have been too easy for too long, okay? I always think about, I have a good friend who's a historian who wrote a book about Rosa Parks called The Dark End of the Street, Danielle McGuire. And one of the things that she said when she first started talking about Rosa Parks, everyone said Rosa Parks sat down so we could stand up. The truth is that Rosa Parks was a very sophisticated political operative who had been investigating for the NAACP, particularly sexual assaults against Black women in the South, for probably a decade before she was arrested on that bus. People underestimate the dangers of what it meant to be arrested on Alabama buses, because Alabama bus drivers were deputized and could carry sidearms. So there is a need, and I only know that because of the many historical works that have come out about Rosa Parks in the last I would say, decade. So one could interpret the lesson from the destruction of Babel also as the benefits and the necessity of diversity. You need the unique voices and perspectives of everyone. How do you communicate across trauma? How do you communicate across place? Like, I did not expect Oklahoma to be so green. I actually texted James's godfather to say, you know, in that musical, they have tumbleweeds. And he was like, Hollywood. That's all he wrote back. How do you communicate across race? These are all very difficult, but I thought that was me, because my mama often calls me at inconvenient times. And if she's on Zoom, she was like, I can't believe you said that. Okay. This is all very difficult work. And I like the word flexible history because it allows for elasticity, but also recognizes boundaries, right? Even the most flexible material, if you bend it too far, it will break. It will lose its authenticity, its original structure, right? So what we need is a flexible history that speaks across all of the ways in which we communicate the American story. So the work that I am doing now is to ask, how do we understand the authority of the state or the limitations it puts in place while still trying to construct a varied versions of our history in ways that support a better, more inclusive national future. So as I come to a close, I thought that was perfect for Dr. Ministers. As I come to a close, and I'm really going to close, mostly because I don't have to pick up offering. Okay. Our brother from Crutcher, he already did that job. So I'm gonna just say a few things. I have to say that, and my child will tell you that I really struggled with this talk, like for weeks, about what to say. And months ago, when I had to give Dr. Davison she was very, very good of her in January, when I had to give her what the title of my talk would be and what it would be about, I thought I would offer a more upbeat version of this talk. And I use my own path because I think it's important for cultural workers to know that your path to the work does not have to be straight. There are lessons in the winding road. I am the director of an institute that supports research on women, gender, and sexuality in a funding environment where research projects that use the word women are difficult to get through. I have spent the last few months strategizing, consoling, checking in on folks who have built careers on work that helps us to see this country for all that it is. I always tell people that I am a patriot in the same way that African Americans and other marginalized groups are, in that I love this country with my eyes wide open. That's how Pastor Darrow set the tone, with my eyes wide open. And for those of us who believe that there should be a fuller conversation about the history of this country, and believe in the hard work of generations of people, right? We have to stand against a political ideology that says any vision that challenges the notion of this country as always great and always white is the enemy. One of the most important sermons of my life is Prathia Hall's Between the Wilderness and a Cliff. I once heard someone say that if you can't be a great preacher, then quote one. Okay, so that's how Prathia Hall shows up. So she uses the time where Jesus emerges from the wilderness, and in his absence, folks begin to question who he is. And Hall talks about how the question they really are asking Jesus is about his very identity. She says that identity is determined by activity. What we do is who we are. So she, like many activists at the time she is speaking, are concerned about what lives steeped in racism, right? The lingering impact of racism coming out of the sort of determination and sense of the sort of soaring achievements of the 1960s, what that will mean. And she is particularly in this sermon, she has this section that sticks with me because I first encountered it when my child was very young, where she talks about sort of what is the impact of living in a world steeped in racism, what is the impact on children and their ability to withstand the forces socially and spiritually that work against them. I always tell my own child, my family is from a town called Eagle Lake, Texas. None of you know it here, but it's just outside of Houston, where my mother's grandmother was emancipated on Juneteenth, crossed the Colorado River, and my family has lived there forever. And I give this about the same way, about the same speech to him. And I say, and in that town, when education has been offered, people in my family have risen to the highest path. And if you go back to that town today and ask about our family, they will tell you we are smart people. This is what I do to get him to do his homework, by the way. So I was like, this is too much. So what you do is who you are. These are my people. Your family has their own stories about who they are. But I would say right now, intellectually, at the very least intellectually, I am in what the old people would sometimes call the low ground of sorrow. I mourn for the fragility of the changes that those before me made, and perhaps in the small ways that I have made contributions. I am in mourning for how clear it is that some of the changes we thought had been cemented actually were not. I often quote, there's a quote from Hall's sermon that I use to talk about my own child to other people, not to him, because he don't care about Prathia Hall's sermon just yet, although he has heard it 50 million times, where she says, I often quote it to talk about younger people, but in this moment I realize it's also a question for me. And she says, we are raising promised land children while we are yet in the wilderness. And the thing is that some of us have begun to believe that we had reached levels of progressivism where we were moving away from, so at least the wilderness was not as wild as we thought it was, right? But she mentions this because she's concerned about whether or not we are raising children who know how to struggle. The truth is that a lot of us have forgotten how to struggle. Or, which I learned from Mr. Goswell's tour and thinking about some of the comments I've heard today, the survivors, some of the survivors of that time have been silent about things. I think my time is almost up. My child is telling me my time is up. I'm gonna say this one thing. In the midst of all in the last Trump administration, whatever your politics are, I hate to offend you, but there was a moment where I asked my mother, I said, Mama, you grew up in Jim Crow, you graduated from high school in 1960. I would just like to think that as bad as I think things may be now, that when you were growing up, things were worse. And my mother looks down and she says, I don't know. That's a lot for a woman who grew up in a small town in Texas to say. I also stopped asking questions like that, by the way. I was like, you don't need to know this kind of stuff. But one of the things that Prathia Hall says, the biggest peril when you're in the wilderness is fear of freedom. The uncertainty of what will happen to you breeds fear. In the face of uncertainty of the wilderness, all we can do is to keep going forward on the path that is good. I love this sermon because we often find ourselves in difficult places, what Hall calls the devil of the wilderness and the devil of the people near the cliff. But the only thing we have to do is to keep moving. I love this sermon not just because of Hall's gifted oratory style, because it reminds me that the only way forward is through. So you don't need me to tell you, right? But the highest form of resistance right now is to keep asserting the history of us is the history of them and is the history of we, right? We have to continue to raise new monuments, and if we stay on the right path, which you all seem to be on, then all kinds of liberation is possible for all of us. Okay, that's it. That's all I got. Okay. I think I went over my time, so I apologize for that. Thank you. Thank you. What am I saying?
I'll be ready. Thank you so much for that stimulating lecture. Can we give Dr. Price a hand one more time? And for those of you that have questions, there are cards and pens circulating. And so please, if you would like to jot something down, we do have a microphone circulating for questions from the audience. For those of you all that are online, if the chat is open, you may also submit questions via the chat, and we will do our best to be able to pose your questions to our lecturer. And so, privilege of being the one sitting up here with you. I'll get the opportunity to pose the first question. As I'm thinking through the narrative, the story that you provided us, I'd like to hear you talk to us about like medium, because you said you've showed us some of the plaques, the cemetery.
Yeah.
Like, what role have you found that medium also plays in terms of the ways that people begin to tell story and monument?
So we became involved in this historical marker because one of the things that we have found, one, we were asked to, and as people who work on a client-based system, you try to help people do what they ask if it's lawful. And they asked us, but historical markers are often the first way that community groups actually go about trying to have a place recognized for its importance, because it's an open application that you submit to the state. And often you will see historical markers in place. Like, I'm sure that before all of the sort of memorial spaces were developed here in Tulsa, there probably was a small marker somewhere. If not a marker, I think about the road we went down with the stairs to nowhere. That's a marker, right? That reminded people. So we try to start where people are. We actually stumbled into the cemetery work, in part because there's an archaeological museum at the University of Kentucky. The director of the museum asked to meet with us, and we were like, we don't understand why. But there's something, I don't know if you've ever been to Lexington, any of you, but there's something called the Kentucky Horse Park, which sits on the grounds of what used to be an old plantation. And when they were expanding the horse park, the family, the sort of white landowners, came and exhumed the graves of their people, but left the graves of enslaved people. And the people who did the excavation work turned them over to the university. And they were just trying to figure out, if we had any suggestions about what should be done. And it turns out that they actually have hundreds of remains of African Americans in the similar situations. They have thousands of remains of Native Americans. So we try to take the questions as they come to us. We have 2 full-time employees. One is a full-time litigator, a full-time lawyer, and a project manager. And our job, as we like to tell people, is not to impose upon communities what is the most important way to memorialize their people. Our job is to help clear the path as much as we can to help them get set up. So for instance, you have a lot of Black people who clean cemeteries, who maintain them, who bury their people there. But when something happens in terms of the city change in policy, they have a hard time intervening because they're not a 501c3, a recognized organization under the law. So we've helped a group become a 501c3, so that they could also apply for state and federal funds that are there to help them clean cemeteries, because the Veterans Administration will help you, if there are veterans buried there, mark those cemeteries and preserve them, right? So, my opinion is not as much about, because I, like anybody else, I have conflicting opinions about monuments, about what they serve, about whether they should be taken down, whether they should be put up. So for instance, I loved a lot of those Confederate monuments when they were spray painted on. I was like, we should keep those. It's fantastic. The graffiti. There was in Baltimore where there was a Confederate statue where there was a plinth. There were these Black ballerinas with the graffiti, and they would stand on them in ballerina poses. And I was like, we should keep that, right? That's wonderful. But for many people, the very sight of them was nauseating, right? Also, that wasn't my community. In Lexington, we had Confederate monuments. There were also where the farmers market was, and the slave market in Lexington are in the same place. And I rarely went to the farmers market because I didn't like it. See, in my own community, I didn't want that, right? So we just try to work with people, particularly marginalized communities, to say, what are the ways we can clear the path until you get the resources you need? So.
This is a future type question. Do you believe that what happened in 1921 I presume in Tulsa, could happen in the U.S. in the immediate or present future under the current political climate?
So I am not a prognosticator. I like data. I like evidence. But I think it would be go against what I know about violence in the U.S. and abroad to say there was a time when we thought in the U.S. we were immune from large-scale violence by the state against citizens. But part of what we are seeing sort of mounted now, which makes people so concerned about violence, is the ways in which violence was deployed against innocent, unarmed civilians during the movement for Black Lives. People were tear gassed, they were arrested, they were violently thrown to the ground, they were doxxed, which means that their private information was put on public. I have a good friend who's a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement. There's something called, I think it's called swatting, where people send out, where her house was stormed by the LAPD SWAT team when someone sent an anonymous tip to her address. So we have to remember that the state, you know, in political theory, there's a way of understanding the state as being the holder, the people who have the right to use violence. That the state is the legitimate controller of violence. And the techniques that they use of violence can be deployed. So I'm not one of these people who is predicting whole-scale roundups, except that I taught immigration for 15 years at the University of Kentucky. So I've been paying a lot of attention to that. I've been talking to some of my own students who are international students. But I think we have to remember that the kind of violence that we abhor in other countries happened here. And if it happened in a place before, it can happen again. And then the question becomes, how do we respond? Well, one, you have to acknowledge that there was violence. And so when we were watching the encampments, for instance, in the fall after the war in Gaza began, and I remember some of the students were actually very shocked about the level of violence used against them. And I remember saying to another person I was talking to about this, and I said, people always talk about Kent State, but they rarely talk about the violence at Southern University, at North Carolina A&T, the number of Black students who were killed that no one ever memorializes on campus. There was a lot of violence in the 1960s. There was a lot of violence in the 1980s, right? So people talk about Tulsa being bombed, but the next place to be bombed was Philadelphia, right? So where there are mechanisms of violence in the hands of people who want to use it, it's always possible for there to be violence.
I'm gonna read, since I had a chance to read through, instead of handing you one, Carter. When there is a clear need for accurate history and monuments, what do you suggest for regular people to do in the face of an administration trying to erase both accurate history and education with critical thinking?
The critical thinking one is hard, because you have to remember I'm a university professor. So that's all I think about. You know, when people talk about university professors indoctrinating students, and I was like, if I could indoctrinate my students, I would get them to do the reading and come to office hours. Like, clearly my powers of control are limited because I clearly cannot get these people to speak up in class. Okay.
We don't have that problem at Phillips.
Yeah, look at y'all. Well, your students are motivated by God, so my students, they don't always have the same motivation. So look, I've talked myself out of whatever it is you just asked me, where I was headed with this. Oh, critical thinking. You know, we just don't do a good job of teaching history here. This Monuments Project is a long time coming. So my son is 15. When he was 8, I was named a distinguished university professor. And they give you $10,000 you have to use in 1 year. And that's very hard for a person who don't have equipment. That's how I ended up at the London School for Economics. So I started writing people in Europe. I was like, I've never been to Europe. So I started writing people and say, if you invite me, I can use this university money to come. But one of the things we did intentionally that was off that path was to go to Berlin. But before we got to Berlin, like for those of you who have been to Paris, I know that sounds like a big timer, but I have been to Paris. And you go around, you'll see these gold monuments on buildings that say, even in my limited understanding of French, but because I can read Spanish, it'll say, you know, in this school, 132 children were turned over to the Nazi government, the barbaric Nazi government, and killed by the Nazi barbaric government and the complicit Vichy French government. They're everywhere. And there was an artist whose names I can't remember now, who went around putting stones, like the sort of Jewish tradition of putting stones on graves, in sites, and then took photographs of sites of lynchings. And it'd be like these stones and a 7-Eleven. These stones and just an apartment building, So we as a country just really are, and partially because we are a forward-thinking country. We come from a big place where there was a lot of land, and people were constantly, if you didn't like where you were, you just moved, right? So I think that the question of critical thinking really begins at much earlier stages about how we even teach and engage with children, which is why I love the children's books around the Tulsa Massacre, because there are a lot of people who don't believe that children can engage in the level of deep thinking to understand these kinds of things. Although, I do have to warn that I was very intentional about my child's reading about people who stood up for people, about injustice, we lived in Kentucky, so we had this great book by George Ella Lyon about whose side are you on, about, stick it to the bosses, and then you quickly learn that your child's first oppressor is you. And so they start standing up to you. But you have to be willing to live with the complicated conversations that arise when you began teaching people real history, right? You have to live with the questions about, and part of it is that we have not been that place. And so what I think places like Tulsa are doing is saying, look, big grown people can answer questions if we have enough education and information about it. And that's sort of where the critical thinking began. It's practiced. Critical thinking it's like a muscle. And if you don't flex it, it will be loose and of less use. So.
And that also reminds me of some of the wisdom that is provided by so many of our womanist theologians and biblical scholars, leaning into notions of intersectionality with when narrating, when telling stories. It's so important that we acknowledge aspects of our privilege, right? Aspects of our agency, so that when we're beginning to narrate and tell these stories, what happens when we're always the protagonist?
Yeah.
We're always either the victim or the oppressor, which is what happened when we're seeing individuals within Black liberation theology not acknowledging the type of cis-normative and gender notions, right?
Yeah.
And so what does it mean to then, with the example that you had from Paris, acknowledging the Vichy government, like this complete, what is necessary for for state agencies, right, to begin to narrate monuments and acknowledge, right, our complicity, our participation, our heritage as XYZ, and not just we survived, or my great-great-great-grandfather was an ally. So, but no, my ancestors participated in this.
One of the things I think is important when we look at the example, and there's a tremendous example when you go to Berlin of the ways in which they have sort of historicized their own past, is that was not driven by the government, it was driven by the people. And a lot of people talk about how if you had gone to Germany in the 1950s, even the early 1960s, there would not have been as much of what we see now, but then young Germans started traveling. In the 1960s, 1970s, they were open to the world in the same way that young people were here. And then they would go places and they would be like, Nazi? And they'd be like, what? And they went home and began asking questions about why don't we know more about the ways in which we are seen in the world. Those things are driven by the people, and you push the government along in those ways. Something else you said about sort of intersectionality sort of came to me as well, but I have sort of lost that thing. But these things are driven by people who demand that people know who they are. And we thought in the last 15 years, 20 years, that we were in a place that was really striving towards this sort of great, the Blacksonian, the Native American Museum. You go to these places. But the truth is that we did not, apparently we weren't bringing everybody along with us on that project. And we don't have to bring everybody. We just have to bring enough people to sustain it. I was just about to quote Fidel Castro, but that's a different story. But a lot of black activists used to go to Cuba in the 1960s, and they would ask Fidel Castro, how have you made this sort of racial transformation, which also it can be questioned now. But what they saw as compared to the United States seemed to be much more racial integration. And he said a quote that I read from somebody else, of Fidel Castro, that I love. He said, you teach young ones a new way, and you wait for the old ones to die. Now, that was much more inventive when I was young, by the way. Now I'm like, old people can learn. So just tell us what you want us to know. But there is something to the ideas that you just have to move enough of a critical mass in the right direction, and things will continue to become what you need it to be. And the question, clearly the critical mass that we thought we had was vulnerable on the edges.
Yeah, and this will be our last question this evening.
Okay.
We understand the 1921 Tulsa race massacre in specifics.
Yeah.
The number dead, the
Yes.
number houses burned,
Yes.
victims. Yeah. But Greenwood's victories and triumphs more in the abstract.
Yeah.
Greenwood was wealthy. Well, how
Yeah.
wealthy? What does that? What does wealth mean? What would it take for us to understand Greenwood beyond its trauma?
I think you're already doing a very good job of that. You know, there is, if we were to, I don't want to say set aside the massacre, every historic black community struggled in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. But not many of them. I grew up in the historic 3rd Ward in Houston, Texas, which is where Texas Southern was. What we wanted, who was that said? Was that Pastor Darrell said economic urban removal. What we got was urban renewal, but what we wanted was critical investment in our communities. And so what I would say to people is that you have to continue to tell people the stories of the vibrant life that people lived, and also live vibrant lives. That there is a very powerful thing in going to that museum, but also to the restaurant next door, and also to the place down the street. My kid tires of me saying, oh, this is where so-and-so lived. This is where this happened. But we have to be almost compulsive in the ways in which we talk about the past, because it's the only instruction we have, not of how the future will be, but most times how we don't want it to be. You know, there is something so important about, you know, because everybody's like, would you be my mentor? And I'm like, no. That's actually true. And I was like, we have to work our way to being a mentor. I don't know you. You don't know me. We could not get along well. Don't walk up to me and ask me to be a mentor. There are steps to this thing. And the first step to being in it is to be talking about, engaging with, rather than quietly mourning the loss or the sadness. I lived in the Appalachian region. I'll say this last thing. And, you know, people tell the story, I forget where it was, of when the Tennessee Valley Authority had to repair a dam. And so they had to let the water go low in the lake that was created by the dam. And when word got out that they were making these repairs, people came from a lot of places just so they could see the stairs where their grandma's house was. Just so they could see it, so they could touch the place. And the thing is, you have to begin by touching the places and talking about them and talking with each other and recording those stories. I also this is sort of random, but I'm going to make one last pitch. Also, for Black people to engage with university preservation efforts, even when the university has not been as good as it should have been to you, and to not hold on to papers and artifacts until they are destroyed, because part of the reason why our stories get lost is because we're not in the places where professional historians go to look for them. And the things that you think, you know, my mother, I hope she's not listening. I once asked her, my parents are divorced, and I once asked her what happened to her wedding ring. And she said, when my divorce was final, I just threw it into a field. There was some story like she just threw it away. And I thought, what if we wanted that? And she was like, it wasn't that great a ring. So but there's a way in which when you are a person who has been exposed to violence, your first instinct is to remove the reminders. And I say, before you throw it out, could you just call your local university and see if somebody might want to keep it? And I'm serious about that. So those are the ways, the sort of practical ways, is that you just have to keep insisting that the story of your people is important. You just have to. So.
Thank you so much. One more hand.
All right. Oop. Oh, that wasn't me. Good. It was this that fell. There we go. Before we leave this evening, it is my honor to express some thanks. First, thank you to Chef Crisp of Black Wall Street Chefs and and Mixology by Meeps, who provided the drinks for this evening. And a very heartfelt thanks to Kaneem Smith and Romeo Clay Robinson. We have been graced by your artistic skills, gifts, your vision, and the ways that you have shared with us your creativity. So thank you again for that. And a very special word of thanks for our long-standing partnership with Nicole Longnecker Gallery. Thank you very much. We are always glad for our partnership and your unwavering support. I think that they would also like for me to remind you that the works in the show by our artists are for sale. So if you would like to take a piece of this home with you, please talk to Nicole and the artists, and we'll get that taken care of. So you can take something home as you wish. We're also deeply grateful to Dr. Doswell and Reverend White and for your organization's partnerships with us this evening. Once again, a thank you to, oh, he disappeared. I was going to say to Pastor Daryl Christopher and the Ingredients who provided our music. And last but not least, to Dr. Melynda Price. Thank you so much. Your lecture has challenged us and inspired us. Personally, I love it. The story of the Tower of Babel, what you said is what I teach too, so we're in good line here. But you have offered us wonderful insights into the ideas of flexible histories and the importance of memory and monuments and the struggles and the possibilities for liberations. So thank you very much. And our biggest thank you is to all of you for joining us here this evening. It wouldn't be an event if you weren't here, so thank you for that. If you would like to donate to Phillips to support our public programming like the Tulsa Race Massacre Lectureship, there is a QR code on the back of your program that will direct you to a donation website. And I think Dr. Doswell said, $1 to $1 million, we will take it all. And what you're willing to be partners with us as we move forward in the futures of our programming, not just the Tulsa Race Massacre Lectureship, but our other programs as well. And to anyone who is already financially supporting us in our work here at Phillips, we couldn't do this alone. So as we go forth this evening, I'm thinking about the importance of telling, listening, and remembering stories. Also about the importance of struggling for truth and for justice in its many ways. And so as we go forth in that struggle, working together, I pray for myself and for all of us that indeed what we are doing is who we are. So thank you all very much. Good evening.